Question of the day, is the Sony ZV-1 still relevant in 2022? Depends.
They don't think we can keep making hits about cameras. But I'm the cameraman. But I'm the cameraman. Stay creamy. Yeah, started on a 50 mil lens.
Hey, if this is your first time to the channel, I'd like to welcome you. This is Lessons Learned with Cameras. My name is Willie. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Sony ZV-1. But before we get started with that, I'd like to apologize for not being consistent for the last week or so with the content, just because I was out doing some shooting for my primary channel. I'm back in the studio now, so now I can get back to making the content. Today we're going to hit on the Sony ZV-1. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the specifications of the camera. Most people already know that. It's a 20 megapixel, 24 to 70 millimeter f1.8 to f2.8 point and shoot camera. I'm going to just go over some of the pros and cons of it, and then we're going to go straight into the field test. And then I'm kind of going to show you for the low light test what it looks like if you were to do a talking head video with this camera in your own studio at home. For all intents and purposes, this camera replaced the point and shoot camera from the Sony lineup, the RX100 series. For now, I mean, I don't know if there's another RX100 slated in the future, but for the most part, people would say that this camera is what replaced it. So there was a lot of flaws with the RX100 series, and Sony tried to address those when it came out with the Sony ZV-1. So with the RX100 itself, there was some pros and there was a lot of cons just because of what it was being titled as, a vlogging camera. In some ways, it missed the mark on that. But again, with the ZV-1, I think they were able to address those issues. With that being said, let's get into the pros of the ZV-1. Pro number one, compact size. This camera is not that big. You know, it's your typical point and shoot camera. It's pocketable as long as you don't have the additional accessories on it. Ease of use. This camera is really easy to use. I think Sony did a great job in some of the placements of the buttons. I mean, they removed a lot of the dials and stuff that we became used to having on other point and shoot cameras or other cameras in the Sony lineup. Built-in ND filters. Yes, this camera addressed the issue of the built-in ND filter, but the variable aperture, f1.8 to 2.8 for 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters. That is a big difference. I'm glad that they went down to the f1.8. I never knew how important that was until I started using my RX100 Mk, which is the f2.8. And there was a significant difference in the amount of light that could be let in to help clear out some of the graininess of the footage. Product showcase. Now, I am one that definitely values product showcase, having that feature in a camera. I wish for some reason, I wish it was in my FX3 and I wish it was in my A7C. I don't know how many times when I'm trying to show something in my hand or focus on something that I have to hold whatever the item is up to the lens and kind of cover my face where my eyes can't show so the camera can focus on the item that I have in my hand. Background defocus. For me, I think it's kind of gimmicky because I can go in my camera and I can set my manual settings to get that desired effect. But for one who's just getting started, who are not familiar with the manual settings on their camera, you know, I do think it comes in handy if you want that shallow depth of field, you want that subject separation. So let's get into the cons. First one for me was build quality. Now, I am coming from an RX100 Mk where the build quality is more sturdy. You know, it feels robust in your hand to be a point and shoot camera. This, on the other hand, feels very plasticky. It feels if I was to drop it one time, this camera would be done. It took a little bit for me to get over that. You know, it just felt real plasticky. It felt real cheap in my hand. It's a con, but we all know the deal with it, the battery life. Yeah, it's just like it is with the RX100 series. They use the same battery, so what do you expect? Noisy zoom feature. Okay, whenever I zoom this camera, I can hear it zooming. And for some reason, I just couldn't understand why that zoom was so loud on this camera. And again, I'm comparing it to my RX100 where I can barely hear my zoom when I'm zooming in and out. I bought this camera on the secondary market, so it could have been an open box. It could have been a return. There could have been something wrong with it. So I haven't talked to another ZV-1 owner to see if they had that same issue with their camera. But if you own the ZV-1 and if you noticed a loud zoom, you know, definitely put it in the comments. Or possibly I just got a bad ZV-1. Last one, low light. So I know this is a f1.8 at the wide end, But with that being said, I mean, there's only so much f1.8 is going to do on a 1-inch sensor. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and take this camera out into the field, do a vlog test some of the functionalities of the camera, test some of the features, and then when we get back in here, I'll give you my take on it. So I'm back out here again today, vlogging with the ZV-1. Equipment I'm using with it, Sony Bluetooth grip, the Rode wireless mic, the old school one, and I'm also going to use the Ulanzi wide angle 18mm adapter. So I like how compact this camera is. It's somewhat discreet with the wireless grip attached to it. Obviously people see what you're doing. It's really light in my hand, way lighter than the setup I use nowadays. So me personally, I think the 24mm lens on here isn't up for vlogging. Some people would disagree with that. They prefer 16mm. But again, for me, that's enough distance, especially if I'm by myself vlogging. So the first thing I'm gonna look at will be the wide angle adapter lens, the Ulanzi. So I'm gonna use this, and then you can tell me if it makes that much of a difference between using 24mm and using around 18mm-ish equivalent of a wide angle adapter lens. So this is with the wide angle adapter lens. It does seem like you can see more of the background in it. Now keep in mind, this isn't a true 18mm because of me still using active steady shot right now. But still, you probably get closer to a true 24mm equivalent by using the wide angle adapter lens. So most of this vlog, I'm probably gonna keep this on just because it doesn't add no extra weight really to it. So I personally picked up the ZV-1 as a replacement camera for my Sony RX100 Mk. As you know from a previous video, I still own the RX100 Mk. But, I wanted this because there were certain features this camera had that my Mark 7 didn't. So I thought this would be a good replacement for that. So the main question, was this camera worth it as a replacement? That's kind of subjective. Most of us try to rationalize once we get a piece of equipment and find a purpose or a use for it. Could I have done without it? Yes. But, I'm still glad I bought it. I am. I would have always wondered what the differences were and if this camera was beneficial to have in my workflow. It's funny, whenever I go to talk about who's this camera for, I'm in the same spot every time at this place. This camera is for someone who's just getting started with videography or vlogging or making content, being a content creator. This camera is for someone who wants to be discreet, don't want to carry around a lot of weight. This camera is also a good B camera, or C, or D, or E, whatever. People come up with all kind of other scenarios for cameras, but it makes a good secondary camera. For someone who this is their only camera, it makes a good primary one. So let's talk about who this camera isn't for. I think first off, someone who in the near future they may want to upgrade to some type of an interchangeable lens camera, then you probably wouldn't waste your time. The ZV-1 probably isn't for you also. If you have a fairly recent cell phone, let's say between iPhone 11 and iPhone 13, ZV-1 may be a hard sell for you, especially with the iPhone 13. As you can see, I'm using the active steady shot that's within the camera. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to standard steady shot. So this is standard steady shot. Again, it's so hard to tell by looking at the display screen if it's shaky or whatever, but again, this is what you get with standard steady shot. Holding it somewhat steady. I'm not doing no ninja walk or nothing crazy, but still, this is the quality you get for stability. And this is with steady shot off. I can see the jitters in the camera now, but still, this wouldn't be bad. You could you could turn your steady shot off, then use your catalyst browse. Speaking of that, I'm gonna go ahead and do that test next with the catalyst browse. And this is with catalyst browse. Catalyst browse probably looks the best, and you probably have a more picture of the background with catalyst browse on. But this is what it looks like. Should be real smooth. Shouldn't be a lot of those micro jitters, but that's what you get. All right, and that's with active steady shot back on. So again, you got ways to stabilize the footage. You got choices, which is always good to have in a small point and shoot type camera. So next we're going to test this background defocus. Right now it's without it being enabled. So I got my own personal opinions about background defocus. I think it's kind of gimmicky because I can change all those settings manually. But again, we're talking about for a person who don't have a lot of camera experience and someone who just want to hit one button and have the camera do that function for them. So this is without background defocus. So let's switch it over. And this is with background defocus. As you can see, it kind of cranked up my shutter speed, but this is what you get with background defocus. I had to do this test walking under a bridge, so hopefully you can see a good example of that. But again, like I said, I've always thought this was kind of gimmicky, but I do see its purpose. If you're a person that want that subject separation, you want that shallow depth of field, so it gives you a little bit of bokeh. Okay, so next let's go ahead and test the internal audio versus external. Right now I'm on the external using the Rode Wireless Go. So this is what you get for sound quality with external audio. Now I'm gonna go ahead and switch it over to the internal audio. Okay, so this is the internal audio without the wind muff on there. Oh, I also took off the wide angle lens adapter, so back to 24 millimeters. So I'm going to put on the wind muff to see if that reduces any of this ambience noise. So I'm still standing in the same spot, try not to move. So this is with the wind muff on here. So can you tell the difference? Does it pick up less of the outside noise? I'm not a big fan of internal audio, even with this little wind muff on, but it does come in handy if I don't feel like hooking up my external audio. This is a good option to have where my RX100 didn't have a cold shoe mount where I can utilize something like this. So this camera does have the option of using picture profiles. Right now I have it with no picture profiles on, so I'm about to go ahead and hit it and see what it looked like with the fake S Cinetone. All right, so this is with the fake S Cinetone picture profile. How does that look? Again, as usual, not really a big picture profile guy, but if I was, this camera would come in handy for having the ability to use picture profiles. So I just had to change my first battery, which battery life on these batteries that this camera uses is really bad. But honestly, this battery did go longer than it does in my RX100. So next, I want to talk about one that I really like in this camera that I wish it was in my FX3 or my A7C, and it's the product showcase. So this is an example of what that looks like when you're using product showcase. See how the background gets blurry and it comes back in focus. And like I said, that's a good feature to have. That's one of the features I do appreciate with this camera, because man, I really wish I had it on my full frame camera for sure. Don't know how many times I get tired of covering my face up to show something that's in my hand. So let's take a look at the zoom feature on here. This is at 24 millimeter and this is at 70 millimeters. 24, 70. All the settings I used today were just the basic auto settings. I think the tolerance for the ISO was like 125 to 6400, which the whole time it's been like around 100 or 160. So didn't even need that. So I tried to keep it really basic. I didn't want to go in here and put a lot of manual settings in here, just to show you, if you were a person that was thinking or considering this camera for the first time, that it is possible to use it in auto mode and you come out with pretty decent results. Okay, all right, so before I close it out, I want to do a quick talking head video with the ZV-1, just to show you what type of results you would get from this if you had it in your own studio doing your own content creating. Now keep in mind, the quality is going to be a little bit different than what I'm using right now, Currently, I'm shooting on my FX3 with my Sony 24mm f1.4G Master. So, you can't expect that type of quality. But again, I'm going to show you what you can look forward to with a camera like this, just using it for regular talking head videos, creating content, in your own house or your own studio. 1, 2, 3. So this is pretty much what you get for the ZV-1 if you're using it for talking head at home in your own personal studio. So I didn't dial the settings in all the way. I just did it kind of real quick, kind of give me a similar setup as I had with my FX3. I tried to keep lighting somewhat the same, but obviously I had to crank up the ISO a little bit higher because of the amount of light that I'm using in here. Right now, I think my ISO is on 800. The f1.8 is still good to go. The shutter is not really where I want it to be. But still, just a quick example. Definitely, if you took more time to do it, you can definitely get more of the grain out. You can give it more of a quality, semi-professional look. So to go ahead and close this out, is the ZV-1 still relevant in 2022? Like I said in the beginning, it depends. Like, I don't want to get into that video today, but when you start talking about the, let's say, iPhone 11 through 13, if you equip those phones with the right amount of memory, it would be very hard pressed to purposely choose a point and shoot camera over one of the cell phones or one of the later model cell phones today. With all this computational magic that they put in these phones, they're getting a lot better with the type of pictures and video that are coming out of it. So I would say, it just depends. It really does. There's some pros and cons to that, but also I want to save that for another video when I do the comparatives. I can tell you right now, there's some things, I don't like taking a lot of video and pictures with the same device that I rely on for communication to get calls and so forth, because that can become of an issue. But again, I don't want to really get into that right now. I personally think the point and shoot cameras are becoming a dying breed. So unless something happens drastically in the next couple of years with these point and shoot cameras, i.e. bigger sensor, it'd have to be something very dramatic with a point and shoot camera to make people want to really go back to them over cell phones. If you like this content and you feel it was useful, please subscribe, hit the like button if you felt it was informative. So definitely more content to come. Talk to you later.